us now, New York Times Foreign Affairs opinion columnist and three-time recipient of the Pulitzer Prize, Tom Friedman. And Tom, I'm glad to have you on to talk about the context around the challenges ahead. You've been covering this conflict for more than 50 years, almost 50 years, and you have never seen anything like this. You have made that very clear in your piece in the New York Times. And two other points that you made. Benjamin Netanyahu's side of the bargain is that he has to reconnect himself with liberal democratic Israel. So the world and the region sees this not as a religious war, but as a war between the front line of democracy and the front line of theocracy. I want to hear about the challenges with that, given the divisions that he's facing there. And also you say, for Israel to do what is most in its interests, not those of Hamas and Iran, will likely require some very tough love between Biden and Netanyahu. I would like to hear more about that as well.
Well, Mika, thank you for having me. This is, for me, I've covered the Middle East for 50 years. I've seen Israelis and Palestinians do terrible things to each other. But it's usually at some remove. It's Palestinians suicide bombing or bombing a bus or a disco in Israel, Israelis bombing Gaza and hitting military targets, but also creating massive civilian casualties. This kind of very face-to-face murderous adventure against men, women, and children, shooting babies at point blank, that's ISIS stuff. It's just not the kind of stuff we've seen up to now in this conflict, much of at least. So, I think the important point that I tried to make in my column today is this is a time that Israel's got to be really, really smart. And by that, I meant ask itself every morning, what does my enemy want me to do? And how do I do just the opposite? So right now, Hamas and its supporters want Israel to go into Gaza with the army, to invade it, and get enmeshed there in the house-to-house fighting. That would also cause a lot of civilian casualties and bog Israel down, possibly down on three fronts against Hezbollah in northern Israel, in the West Bank, and in Gaza. So I think it's very important that whatever Israel does, if it has to, in order to hit the Hamas targets that it needs to, it do it as much from afar and not get dragged into the heart of Gaza. I think it'd be a huge strategic mistake for Israel. And beyond that, we have to remember, because there's going to be a commission of inquiry when this war is over in Israel. It has a history. When that commission of inquiry happens, the number one witness in the dock needs to be a man named Benjamin Netanyahu. This is a leader who did not prioritize the fight with Hamas, who did not prioritize Israel's conflict with Iran. His number one priority was a judicial reform, a judicial coup d'etat, in order to strip the Israeli Supreme Court of its power to oversee the Israeli government. That putsch basically fractured Israeli society, fractured the Israeli military, triggered 40 weeks in a row, basically, of 100,000 plus Israelis demonstrating in their streets, and triggered Israeli Air Force pilots, reservists, the tip of the Israeli spear, to say, we don't fly for a dictatorship, we fly for a democracy. That was going on. That was completely distracting the Israeli military on the eve of this fight. Netanyahu had 1 ounce of dignity, he would have resigned already. But this man is the number one person responsible for this failure in Israel. Never let him on your show without him having to answer for that. Because people told him all along, you are fracturing the military. This is dangerous what you're doing. A week before this war, I quoted a former Israeli Director General of the Defense Ministry saying our reserve units are not right now. We are not prepared the way we need to be. And what he has done has been one of the greatest abdications of leadership in the history of the Jewish state.
As bad as you described the situation, is it possible for him to pull the government together and act in a way that the United States and the world can work with to try and stamp out this terrorism?
Well, again, it's a very important question you're asking me, and this is what I hope, I believe President Biden is saying to him, which is that you've got to think about who the Israel National Security Minister is, Mika. He's a man named Itamar Ben-Gvir. This guy, when he was a young man, was considered so radical and so kooky, the Israeli army wouldn't take him. That guy is Israel's national security minister today. He's in that cabinet because Bibi needed a cabinet who would protect him from his corruption charges. When you are facing a mortal threat to the state, the idea that you have one of the Proud Boys as your national security minister is incredibly reckless and irresponsible. So he needs to create a national unity government with the very best of Israel's military establishment, some of whom are in the opposition parties now. They're talking about doing that, but these guys don't want to serve in a cabinet with these knuckleheads. You have to understand, Mika, this is the weakest Israeli cabinet I have ever seen. I would not let the members of this cabinet serve as waiters for my kid's bar mitzvah, let alone run this war at this time for Israel.
I'm going to set aside the cautionary tale I think you're telling as it pertains to another Trump administration.
Mika, you shouldn't. This is off Broadway to our Broadway. This is what happens when you entrust your government to people who are completely inappropriate to running a government at such a strategic time, and who absolutely put their ideology ahead of their own country's economics and national security. It's called the House of Representative Republican Caucus.
Okay, well, I was just going to put it aside for a day or two, but I hear you completely, and I completely understand. And I think we have to talk about this more and look about the reality that this country confronts when a similar type of government structure is set up with people who are totally unfit for office are put in office. Setting that aside for now, I'm curious because leaders in the region were as shocked as you about this attack from land, from hang gliders, from on foot, on golf carts, from the air. It is fair to believe that this Hamas terrorist group is in a situation where they are going all in. Is it fair to believe they have nothing to lose? They must have known the response to this would be swift, robust, and it would be immediate war. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm curious about other interests poisoning this already poisonous situation. Iran, and I ask about Russia.
So, Mika, these are all really critical questions. Basically, what my column the point I tried to make this morning is that I believe Hamas was out to trigger a ferocious Israeli response that would cause a lot of casualties among Hamas's own, supporters and civilians in Gaza for one purpose. Hamas is strategic. Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood that it is part of, regionally, sees as a strategic threat the attempt to put together a deal by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel that would normalize relations between Saudi Arabia, the most important Muslim country, and the Jewish state. And as part of that deal, Israel would be expected to make concessions to the Palestinians to revive a two-state solution with the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, the decent Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, the Palestinian Authority that has recognized Israel's right to exist. For the Muslim Brotherhood groups in the region, the Islamist groups, the idea of normalization between the keeper of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina and the Jewish state and the moderate Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, that is a fundamental strategic threat to Iran, to Hezbollah, and to Hamas. And I believe what triggered this war was their belief that if they can drag Israel into Gaza, force it to cause massive casualties, that will make it impossible for the Saudis then to go ahead with this deal. So I know Secretary Blinken is leaving for the Middle East this morning, and I'm sure that on his priority list is actually to not do what the others want the United States to do, but actually to go ahead with trying to forge this new relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia, including the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and reviving a two-state solution. We have to keep our eye on that ball. I'm sure the President and Secretary Blinken are doing that. And by the way, just how about Joe Biden? These knuckleheads on Fox every day say, this 80-year-old guy can't put two sentences together. He put the Western alliance together around Ukraine. He's putting an alliance together now on Israel. And one thing about Joe Biden, you can tell about that speech, Mika, no one had to write that speech for him. No one had to write that speech for him. I can't think of a single Democrat, let alone a Republican, who would give that speech that way at this time.
Yeah, it was a powerful speech, and it was heard loud and clear in Israel, that's for sure. Tom, I want to just follow up on your point that you just made in the piece, which is there needs to be some measure of restraint here from Israel for the good of the larger peace process. Obviously, we know how we all felt at 9/11 in this country. That's how Israelis are feeling today. They want a response. They want retaliation. They want redemption for their babies and their mothers and their grandmothers who were slaughtered. So how can you prevail on Prime Minister Netanyahu and indeed the Israeli people that it's wise in this moment to actually be restrained? How do you make that case? And if it's not a ground invasion of Gaza, what is appropriate here?
Well, Willie, it's again a really important question, which is why I was trying to focus on it today. The foremost dangerous words in the Middle East really are once and for all. We're going to finish this problem once and for all. There's no problem you're going to finish in that part of the world once and for all. And there's only one thing worse, really, for Gaza. The only thing worse than a Hamas-led Gaza is a nobody-led Gaza. So if you're going to go in there and take down Hamas, you better have a very clear idea of who's going to run the place, because it can produce its own different kind of insecurity for you. And that's why I'm appealing to Israelis to don't make the mistake that we made after 9/11, which was running off headlong, and I was part of that mistake, into Iraq and Afghanistan without a clear plan of what happens the morning after. The morning after these things, you just get in there, you pound people, you express your rage, you bomb people, but everything has to be focused on what happens the morning after. And I think Israel needs to think really clearly about this, because there's a reason, despite all the violence between Israel and Hamas, it's ended up having to deal with Hamas again. Now, I hope there is an alternative, if not Hamas, at least some alternative leadership there that's ready to behave differently at some point. I have no illusions about that. But you have a real problem. Hamas wiped out all alternative power sources in Gaza, political power sources. And therefore, if you eliminate them, what are you left with? So I understand the rage, the need for Israel to restore its deterrent. I would say another point, Willie, reading the papers this morning, there was a threat. What worries me, if you said, hey, Tom, what worries you at this second right now? What worries me at this second is that a second front opens up between Hezbollah and Israel in the north of Israel. I do not believe Israel right now, in the frail condition of its army and its people, can handle a second front if it really explodes on the Israel-Lebanon border. We have a U.S. aircraft carrier now pulling up near Cyprus. It is not, I'm not predicting this, but it is the realm of possibility that the United States would have to intervene on Israel's behalf if you got a full-scale missile war going in the north of Israel between Hezbollah and Israel. Now, what does that do? This Iraqi militia leader, pro-Iranian militia leader, said this morning, if the United States enters this war, we'll go after their troops in our region with drones. I mean, you are off to the races if that happens. So we got to really follow that northern front in Israel. Now, that is the trigger of a region-wide war. And by the way, Vladimir Putin, maybe he's watching our show right now in Moscow, Willie. And you know what he's thinking? Geez, about 2 more weeks of this war, and Ukraine will have no weapons. And boy, if America gets enmeshed in a war in the Middle East, wouldn't that just be so tasty for Vladimir Putin? So all these things are connected, and we got to see them in that global context.
And that's why we've seen President Zelensky out a lot in the last few days, raising his hand in solidarity with the Israelis, but also saying to the world, don't forget about us. You raised the important question, Tom, of the North and of the role in Iran in all of this. We've heard some people say publicly that Iran greenlit this operation from Hamas, this savage attack on the border and into Israel. We've heard others publicly saying, officials from Israel and the United States saying, well, we don't see a direct link. Because frankly, if they said that publicly, now Iran is responsible. So how do you deal with that question? We know that Iran supports and backs and funds Hamas and Hezbollah and those groups. So if Iran is shown to be explicitly responsible here, what happens next?
Well, Iran, has been a long time financial and military and training backer of Hamas, whether they were specifically involved in this operation. They're part of an alliance with Hezbollah and Hamas to basically surround Israel and create a deterrent for Iran should Israel try to launch rockets against Iran nuclear facilities. So, right now the Iranians know Israel has submarines in the Persian Gulf, and that should Iran, enter this war in any even more direct way, Israel has a retaliatory capacity. Israel also has a record of using targeted assassinations of Iranian officials in Tehran in order to deter Tehran. So, but this incredibly combustible combination of Iran and Iranian-backed militias with drones it just shows you how complicated the situation is. If you think back, people compare this to the 73 war. When the 73 war happened, Willie, basically Henry Kissinger, he just had to make 3 phone calls. One to President Saddam, one to President Assad in Israel, one to Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of President Assad in Syria, and one to Golda Meir in Israel. 3 phone calls, all the people he had to call. Who do you call now? Half the people you call now, the phone comes off their wall. We're talking about militia leaders. We're talking about small cells. And that is it's part of the incredibly complex geopolitical environment we have to deal with now. Israel, I would say this is probably the first time in history, finds itself at war today on 2 fronts with non-state actors, Hezbollah in the north and Hamas to the west. So, trying to even get a ceasefire now, acting through states to get to the non-state actors, is going to be extremely challenging. But welcome to the future. This is the future of warfare. It's not a war between Israel and a superpower, even a regional superpower like Iran. It's a war between Israel and what I call super empowered angry men. And the super empowered angry men, the first archetype of that was Osama bin Laden, are hell on wheels in order to confront.
So, Tom, we're sure that our audience appreciates the clarity of your thought, as you've told us this morning, especially with regard to the Israeli army going into Gaza, welcome to Fallujah, overextending itself, items like that. But what about perhaps the most dangerous element in all of what's going on right now? And the most dangerous element, some would submit, is, as you just referenced, Bibi Netanyahu. Given the rocky relationship, the up and down relationship between the President of the United States and Bibi, what's to prevent Bibi from trying to win the moment and lose the war?
Really good question, Mike. I don't know. I think right now he's, I'm sure, extremely chastened. He knows history's judgment awaits him down the road. But what I fear most is he's surrounded with a few exceptions, like Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who's a serious guy. The rest of his cabinet is just a bunch of knuckleheads. And so that's why he needs to get some of them out, bring in people like Gantz, who was a former chief of staff of the Israeli military, former defense minister, bring in Yair Lapid and his opposition party, get a tight, focused, and decision-making group with serious people. I hope he'll do that, but I don't guarantee he will, because he's worried these people will join his cabinet now, then abandon him in 3 months, and then he'll be having to, right about when he'll be having to testify at his corruption trial. This is a guy on trial in 3 cases, not 91 like our president, but 3. And the parallels, Bibi and Trump are brothers from different mothers. Okay, they are the exact same DNA mix, and they both got their respective countries into places they never should have gone out of their own personal interests and mistakes. And Americans need to watch this scene in Israel. This is what it looks like when you entrust a leader who is completely compromised by his own corruption trials to navigate a country through an incredibly dangerous and difficult moment. If you like the show you're seeing in Israel, then bring it on in the United States. But if you don't, think hard and long that this is a serious moment. This is not a joke. This is not the politics and entertainment of sports. There are moments in history where you need a leader who is a serious navigator, not a clown. And this is one of them. And we could face the same one. You got to understand, Mike, we're at a moment in the world where there are 2 giant tipping points in play. One is around Ukraine, one is around the Middle East. If we can bring Ukraine, this war to an end with the Ukraine that's in NATO and on a path to entering the European Union, that would be the biggest geopolitical shift in Europe since Germany joined East Germany joined West Germany. If we can bring Israel and Saudi Arabia and the Palestinian Authority into an alliance in the Middle East, that would be the biggest geopolitical shift in the Middle East since Camp David. Both of those are now hanging in the balance, and we need to keep our eye on that ball.
Yeah, and in the case of the former president here, it's 91 counts over 4 indictments and also civil suits that he's dealing with. I mean, he is drowning in legal issues. New York Times opinion columnist Tom Friedman, thank you so much for all of your insights this morning. We appreciate it.